Welcome very much, and welcome everyone, to another Meet the Guru. Sorry for my stumbling. I'm Paul Siegel. Ross Maynard is our guru today. Thanks for joining us, Ross.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.
Thanks for joining us from across the pond. Meet the Gurus, as all of you know, is dedicated to technology, business, and entrepreneurship, and how these fields have converged in powerful ways to change the way we live. It's sponsored by Starweaver and devoted to spreading ideas, knowledge, and insights. And today's program is all about process and process improvement. And we have someone who's been in the field for quite a long time, knows all about the nuances of it. And so, Ross, before we get going, I have a bunch of questions for you, and we take questions from people who are live now watching. Tell us how you got into the field. What spurred you, and what were your drivers?
Well, I started off in a completely different direction. At university, I studied hotel and catering management, and I lived in France for a year, which was wonderful. That was a kind of major turning point for me, and I enjoyed when I was in France working in this huge hotel. I enjoyed the kind of the processes that they had, particularly the finance processes, the accounting processes. And I realized that I didn't want to be a hotel manager. I wanted to be a finance process manager. So I finished university a year after that and started to study accountancy. And I'm a qualified management accountant here in the UK, the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. And soon after that, I joined one of the big four consultancies working on all sorts of improvement projects. And, amazingly, that was 30 years ago. Doesn't seem like it. And since then, I've, developed my experience. I've been working for my own business for 22 years, I think it is now. Um, Finance process improvement, but also more broadly, general process improvement. And since the COVID outbreak, I've been working on a lot of health service processes as well, helping, doctors' practices and hospitals try and kind of get back on track and try and manage in the coronavirus environment.
So, what is, I mean, and this may sound like a silly question, but what is process improvement? What is obviously we all have an idea, but what is it from a professional's point of view? What do you think of it as?
Well, the core concept in process improvement is that every business works through processes. So you may think of a business in terms of departments, human resources, finance, operations, but in actual fact, it's end-to-end processes that matter. So a customer places an order, that may go to the operations team, but there's finance people involved as well. There's HR people, there's a supply chain. That is the whole process that runs right through the business. Research and development, innovation, that's a process that involves, teams from throughout the business. It involves external stakeholders as well. So a business is made up of processes which run right through the business and take little regard, if you like, of departments. And businesses need to focus on those processes because that's where they add value, but
Hmm.
that's also where they burn cost.
Right.
Rather than looking at, say, department budgets, you need to look at how the cost of the whole process, the value added of the whole process, and try and improve the whole chain because what you do in one area will obviously knock on to other areas.
Kind of like an organic, like the body itself.
Yeah,
Someone
absolutely.
just recently did something on data science and drew the analogy between the nervous system. Obviously, these are interconnected systems, and sometimes, a failure in one you don't realize is going to cause a failure in another.
Precisely that. So if I'm obviously have a finance background. If you change something in the finance team, if you change your finance procedures, that's going to impact on these revenue earning processes. And it may be in ways that you didn't quite understand, you didn't plot through unless you think from a process improvement point of view.
So what are the benefits? What are the outcomes? What are people looking for when they say process improvement? Because some of this stuff sounds very generic to the average person. Like, what does
Yeah.
that mean? But what is it like? Even from a hotel to a major financial institution or a major technology company, what does it mean? What are the benefits?
Well, the benefits are you focus on the value that you create for the customer, for your stakeholders, and you kind of map the process, if you like, all the way through the organization so that you can focus everything on improving that value, creating that value more efficiently, and therefore improving profitability. So you're not looking at things in compartmentalized, you're looking at the entire chain of value from the customer through the organization to the supply chain, and you're trying to make that more streamlined. So if you think of it like, a train or something, you're trying to make the train more streamlined on its tracks, straighten out the tracks of the train, so that the whole thing runs more efficiently and therefore more cost efficiently and therefore more profitably, but also satisfies the customer better. So you're having less complaints, less rework, etc.
And obviously there must be measures, like everyone knows KPIs and whatnot, and I think one of the probably hardest things, and I can say this as an entrepreneur for many years and having looked at many businesses as well as a banker, many people don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they need to measure, right? And so sometimes, as a finance person, you'd say the bottom line or the top line or, what is the inventory turnover, or there's always sort of things. But, in terms of other processes besides finance, which I'd like you to talk about as well,
Yeah.
talks about some financial metrics and talk about some non-financial metrics. That'll be very helpful for people, I think.
Yes. What was I going to say? I mean, it's not just about financial metrics, and I've written, several courses on KPIs and KPIs for SMEs and all sorts of things. But you want, if you remember the term from the 1980s, the balanced scorecard, and the several books that were produced at that time, you want a balanced picture of performance measures. So some financial measures, sure, but those financial measures are kind of trailing measures, if you like. The leading measures are customer delivery, customer satisfaction, quality of output. You also want human resource type measures, for example, the skills of the workforce, your employee turnover, etc. You want environmental impact measures, those sorts of things. And obviously all those things could combine to give you many hundreds of measures. You want to be able to boil those down into, say, 6 to 10 key measures for a business process. And that's the challenge. That's the difficult thing. I once worked with an organization, a manufacturing organization of about 150 people, and they had 50 performance measures. They had an entire team of analysts producing a huge report every month.
Right.
And then it took the management team hours to try and work it out. And because there were so many measures, you couldn't get a clear direction of what was happening. So the challenge is to make, say a dozen performance measures that really show the operation of the process.
It's funny. A presentation coach told me that you should never tell people more than 3 things, because people do not remember more than 3 things, and you have 3 levels of performance. But it's literally like I've forgotten. Well, actually, if you remember back to the Steve Jobs Apple presentation, he talked about it: a widescreen communicator, what was it? The widescreen communicator, a new internet device, and a phone. And then he repeated it. So it was a widescreen iPod. It was a internet communicator and a new phone. A widescreen, and repeated it. He says, no, it's not 3 things. It's 1 thing. So, it's like, getting 50 metrics sounds like you're measuring everything, but you're probably measuring nothing because you can't even track it. You don't even know which one feeds into the other one.
Precisely right, yeah. So the challenge is to be less obsessive and, focus on the bigger picture. What are the 3, 4, 5, 6 measures that show the bigger picture? And if they start to show a problem, then you drill down into more detail, sure. But you don't need a management report every month that gives you 50 measures, because you'll never make head nor tail of that.
And once you've got whatever measure, let's say it's customer churn, let's say it's throughput of items, whatever those are. You probably got that at a level you can say, look, that's not something we really need to put on our KPI list right now, right? Because it's working. Or is that not the case? Do you just drop it off and say, look, I've got another measure, sort of a ever improving process methodology?
Yeah, I mean, you might have headline measures and you might have secondary measures that kick in if there's a problem in a particular area. But yes, I mean, you mentioned 2 great measures there: the customer churn, the level of on-time customer delivery, if you like, your throughput, your process lead time, so how long it takes you to work through your business process. That's a key measure of flexibility, for example, because the quicker you can run your process, the quicker you can turn to changes in the market or take on new customers, new products, and so on. So there are kind of headline measures that you can have that you can then drill down if you need to, if you want to do some analysis or some, cost benefit analysis to get more detail.
Yeah.
And as you say, if something's running smoothly, you drop that off the headline list and you put something in that you want to put a bit more attention on, that you want to do a bit more improvement work on.
I thought this might be an interesting, idea that if you're involved in some process, whatever it might be, software development, it might be an operational system process inside a big technology company. Sometimes like what I'm in my job, the company's measuring certain things, but I want to measure things because I want to be able to measure my own performance. I'll be able to say to my boss or my peers, "Hey, this is what I've hit." Is it wise? I mean, I'm sort of asking questions what I think it is wise, but is it wise to have someone who's not in your field at all? You tell them what you do and say, well, what would you measure? Like someone who's never had the experience of processing widgets, or so someone doesn't have the experience, but they have a logical gut sense of, assuming you're not doing something so esoteric that someone couldn't understand it. Like if I'm running my restaurant, I use restaurant analogy. Someone said, I said, "Hey, what would you measure as the things of performance in my restaurant?" And they might say cleanliness of the floors. I like menus that really, that people like studying for longer than a few minutes. I don't know. I'm coming up with ideas, but is there an outside way to come up with performance metrics that are kind of, let's say, out of the box ways of thinking about problems?
Well, I wouldn't say out of the box because obviously every business is different, but there is a structure which is to focus on the strategic objectives of the organization. So, taking your restaurant example and trying to think off the top of my head, it depends at what market it's aiming at. What market is this restaurant aiming at? Let's say it's a relatively high level restaurant. So, we're aiming at this type of customer. How successful are we in attracting that type of customer? That might be a measure. What's our average, our average cover, if you like, the average spend of each customer? What is the average spend on wine, for example, because we want to sell these bottles of wine? What do these customers want? Well, you mentioned cleanliness. So, what's our quality score on cleanliness? What's our, inspection by whatever organization we're a member of?
Mm-hmm.
So you link your measures back to your strategic goals, what you're aiming for in, 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, to show that your performance is driving the achievement of those strategic goals.
Now, one of the things you were thinking as you were talking about that, I was imagining walking down a street in London, and let's say there's the high-end restaurant on the left, and there's not the high-end restaurant on the right, and let's say you find a certain age group migrating just because the look of the outside of your store, your restaurant, migrates to you because you present yourself in such a way, versus maybe you get what you consider quote unquote the wrong type of audience, maybe an audience that from your perspective I'm not, but just looks like they're not walking in, but they come to my front door. That could be a metric, right? It could be a metric that says, I want people to, before they buy anything or come to enjoy my food, I want to know if they even are if my restaurant itself is appealing. I'm just throwing out an example of a possible metric that one might come up with.
Absolutely, and that would be linked to your marketing strategy, and I presume your kind of social media and who's looking at your website and all that kind of tracking that you can do online nowadays. And you might see that there's a problem because the people that you want are walking past, they're not even looking. So you need to start to drill into that. You need to do some customer survey work, probably. You need to speak to the customers that are coming in, find out what the gap is, put some actions in place, and then put some measures in place to measure those actions.
And the process, obviously, as most people who have ever experienced Agile, understand that one of the major things that Agile did, while there is a process associated with it, is it really began to focus on the customer, right? The voice of the customer, like your end user. I've got to deliver value to you. So how do you? What's the there's the voice of people saying, "Well, stay within the process. We've got to do it this way. This has always worked for years," versus the customer said something and I need to listen to them.
Yes, well, process improvement is all about the voice of the customer versus the voice of the process. So you need to understand what the customer wants in terms of your target customers, obviously, and your strategy towards them, and you need to be able to judge or measure the process in terms of your ability to deliver those outcomes. So your measures for the internal process become linked to your measures for the customer satisfaction, etc., achieving your customer outcome. And if there's a difference, if your process, the voice of the process, can't deliver what the voice of the customer wants, you clearly have a problem. You clearly need to do improvement work. So those two, that dichotomy is where process improvement lies.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's kind of funny. It's like when you want to default to, in your restaurant, if you want to default to what to do, or in a business. I mean, I think of this all the time. We always come back to, yes, we could improve that, and that could be better, and it would make us feel better. But no one will be more satisfied with what we do, with what we deliver or what we produce.
Yeah, I think there's both things. I mean, we don't want to get too logical and too rational because that can turn people off. A lot of business improvement is kind of emotional, if you like. People buy emotionally, not rationally, so we have to deliver that emotional, that kind of psychological aspect. If we want to get our team and the organization involved, then we also need to be able to improve the things that are bugging them. Maybe the staff bathrooms are not quite pretty enough. That possibly won't drive any more customers into the business, but it'll keep the staff a bit happier, make them feel engaged, and which in turn will impact on the customers. So, there's both. You can't measure everything. Some things you want to improve because it's the right thing to do or because it gets your staff engaged. There's both angles to it. It's not all rational, 2.2 to 10 decimal places
Right.
performance measures.
Right. And I think that, from what I've always understood, a lot of these process improvements is not necessarily about the machinery, but it's about
Yeah.
the people, right? It's about, I've always said to my team, if anyone ever, if you want to get ahead in life, and if someone says to you, so what was the best thing about the company, or what was the really thing that differentiated that company? I mean, I'm sure people at Apple would say it was the iPhone. I think it was the people, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and because the people made the iPhone and the people designed it, and all those people, certainly Steve Jobs wasn't even in favor of the iPhone to begin with, if people know some of the history. But so getting your people to be passionate about performance, and thinking about the customer, it seems to be, one of the most important steps in the whole, in the whole
Oh,
process.
it's probably the most important thing. People drive improvement. Apart from an entirely automated process, it's your people that are going to make the difference between, delivering a happy customer and delivering a dissatisfied customer. And in probably most of the processes that I've worked with, the main causes of problems and delays are handoffs between different teams, different IT systems requiring rekeying where errors occur in the rekeying, for example, um, you know, authorizations and all that sort of thing. So the interactions that happen between different people and different teams of people are typically where errors arise and where delays arise, and that in turn leads to customer satisfaction. Of course, machines can break down and all that kind of thing, but typically it's people not quite working as smoothly together as they might, as you would want them to,
Right.
and that, of course, requires people work.
And a lot of that's communication technology. I mean, I got involved in so-called information technology when there was information companies in the early 1990s, and I mean database companies and publishers and hardware software companies, and never the
Yes,
twain met. Now,
yes.
obviously, in the mid 90s, it all became one or began to merge, and now it's clearly one and the same, right? We don't say, "Hey, I got on the computer network, right? I really got connected with people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's really connected with people. So, and there's so many different tools for that right now. I mean, do you? Maybe
Sure.
it's a little bit of diversion, but do you have a particular favorite or favored series of process improvement tools?
My favorite process improvement tool is working with a team of people in a room, and that's been rather difficult for the last year and a half because of coronavirus. It's all had to be done on Microsoft Teams, which is great. Microsoft Teams is lovely. I'm not disparaging it, but there's nothing quite like the kind of the group feel that you get with 8 or 10 people in a room on a big whiteboard drawing out a process and then putting in how long it takes at each step and where the problems arise. So my favorite software is peopleware, if you like.
That's great. I like that. I like
Um,
that phrase.
I mean, and there are lots of software tools out there. There's, software for timing processes and for drawing process maps and all that kind of thing. And of course, we'll use that. but ultimately it's people coming together.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of organizations I've spoken to in the last 18 months, they've found that harder because they haven't been able to bring their people together. So the process improvement impetus has kind of stalled
Mm-hmm.
because it's not the same trying to do it on Teams.
Right. That's true, and I think that's one of the things we've all learned. I think that, from my experience, my belief is that we will be using the same technologies even more so, even when we're in the same rooms now.
Oh
Where
yeah,
we're now able to leverage them in different ways, and so it's never, my experience is never that one really replaces the other, one supplements the other,
exactly.
and
Yes, and yeah, that's right. There's a lot more you can do with a team now. You can put a big screen up on the wall,
right.
and all working together. There's all these collaborative tools which are pretty good. I use Miro boards a lot. I don't want to advertise, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
think tools that people can come into maybe when they're at home or they're not working and put an idea up on the community board and take things forward that way as well.
Here was we had a client, was the largest one of the largest gas and electric companies in the United States, and we were running programs. This is years ago, for not that many years ago, for them in smart boards. And the funniest thing was, I
Oh,
mean, and it's kind of curious because they're talk about process improvement. The way they use smart boards would be never. I would never have thought it. When there's a gas leak or there's an electric cut, they the people in the field actually have a mapping software that gets somehow projected into the smart boards, and they can
mhm.
literally on the smart boards draw where they need to make cuts and rerouting of what lines. And so, of course, that was, and this was literally the product smart boards was the product. I'm sure there are others today as well, and obviously even any tablet does this type of thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
the ways in which you show people things, like even in teaching, use Wacom or another scratch board, right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
So these are all things that can really improve.
Yes, yes.
One of the things I always say to people also, I've forgotten the numbers, but there's something like a 70% improvement in your productivity when you get a second monitor on your computer.
I completely agree with that. I've got a second monitor up on here, and yes, you can have your notes up on one screen and be talking to somebody and be doing the Miro board and then show your screen and all of that. So yeah, very much helpful.
Yeah. So can you tell us, like, as we're kind of coming to the close, can you tell me a little about like a war story that maybe one that went really well, but you were surprised and you didn't think would, and maybe that one went poorly and you were sure it was going to go well.
Oh
Not to
gosh.
obviously name names, but to describe situations where the unexpected outcome occurred. Kind of on both sides, both. You thought it was going to be like this obvious, simple process, but then what happened and what happened that caused that, and then the one that was just the opposite.
Don't like to admit to mistakes.
Yeah,
I think
well, I
one
mean, it makes us stronger, right?
where traditional thinking was shaken up was I was working with a manufacturing company in Italy, in northern Italy, and they had about maybe 200 people there, and um, they manufactured valves for the oil and gas industry, for the refrigeration industry, for all sorts of industries. So they had all these valves of different sizes, from really huge ones to really rather small ones, and they all went through the same process, and they all had to go through the same heat treatment process. And that was the traditional way they ran it, and it was all ERPs and batches and all that kind of thing. And then we started to do some lean thinking. We did some lean training with them. I did some lean accounting, lean finance training with them, and they started to realize that that was actually very inefficient to have this one big heat treatment process that was holding everything up because that took a certain number of hours to do the heat treatments. And they started to do the cost benefit analysis on what it would take to have much smaller heat treatments and split this one process into 4 or 5 processes for these different types of valves. And they did that as a kind of toe in the water type thing. So they broke out a couple of processes that needed less heat treatment and therefore could have a much smaller type heat treatment process, and that worked for them. So then they took the plunge and replaced their huge heat treatment thing, whatever it was, with smaller, more technologically advanced things. And although that did cost them a lot of money, they realized almost immediate boosts in terms of customer satisfaction, ability to deliver rush orders to customers, ability to, pivot what they were producing to the customer requirements. And, that skyrocketed their profitability essentially, because they became much more flexible by splitting out their processes and kind of being smaller and leaner literally, obviously, um, but it was against their kind of traditional manufacturing thinking. And I think where processes haven't worked, where improvements haven't worked, where they should be simple, I think back to a much more of a people process. I did work with a social care organization here in the UK, and and it was finance processes. There were lot in the UK here. Local authorities, so local councils, pay for certain people's, disabled people or elder people's care. So they all have to be invoiced, and you would think that was a fairly simple process. But because they all had different requirements and there was different levels of care provided by different councils, it became rather complex. And the obvious answer was, or seemed to be, to me, to have a finance team for each of these local councils that would, know in detail what their requirements were, how they constructed the bills, how they invoiced, etc. But the company insisted on having a central finance team in London who were, because it was in London, rates of pay were much higher, so they were able to attract less able people for the rates that they were offering. And there were constant mistakes, constant invoices not getting paid or invoiced incorrectly. The cash flow was terrible because of that. I had to do a project with them to recover hundreds of thousands of pounds from different local authorities by just simply getting the invoices right, which
Yeah.
seems, a terrible waste. But they wouldn't listen to the message of,
Right.
devolve your finance team, get the local expertise
Mm-hmm.
involved, rather than trying to have this centralized, low-paid, finance clerks essentially who didn't know the requirements, weren't really motivated because they didn't earn that much money, and it was going wrong all the time, and yet they wouldn't listen to the different way of working.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Sometimes people hire experts to make excuses, and sometimes people hire experts to
oh
get
yeah,
results. And
yeah,
it's sometimes no matter how much, the expertise and how strong the brand of the expert, whatever, you obviously have great expertise and great brand. Um, People just say, "No, thanks for the advice," and they just do it their own way, and then you just and then later on they come back and say, well, I should have followed your advice. But anyway, thank you very much, Ross Maynard, for a wonderful Meet the Gurus, and we'll see some of your courses online soon.
Thank you very much, Paul, and hello to everyone out there, and especially to my friend Mario, who I believe is watching.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks. Okay. Hey, Mario. See you guys next time on Meet the Gurus.
Thank you.